Welcome to today's webinar from Just Money Movement. I'm Sarah Edwards. I'm the Executive Director of Just Money Movement. Thank you for being here with us this afternoon. We've got a great lineup of speakers to help us think about this afternoon's topic. Challenge Amazon, break the habit, fix the rules. And today you'll hear how you can get involved with this campaign that Just Money Movement launched last month, and to hear from different speakers about different aspects of the campaign, but also different aspects of the way that we can engage with and get involved in a more hopeful way of imagining our economic life together. The global economy we know isn't working for everyone. It's driving inequality, environmental harm, and concentrating wealth in the hands of a few. And Amazon, the world's largest online retailer, is a prime example of these problems, pardon the pun. Amazon doesn't pay its taxes fairly or transparently, and their tax avoidance is estimated to cost just the UK hundreds of millions at least every year. And we believe at Just Money Movement, as part of our campaigning and education work, we talk about tax as a potential tool for the common good, a way that we can pay for the kind of public services and infrastructure that we need as a society to flourish, and that we can tackle inequality. Today's event is taking place during Fair Tax Week, which is hosted by the Fair Tax Foundation, and we'll hear from their chief exec in a minute. And it's about drawing attention actually to the good practices of businesses in terms of those businesses that whose tax conduct is fair and transparent. And Fair Tax Foundation has something called the Fair Tax Mark, which is like an accreditation scheme for businesses. And so we're part of that. We host Tax Justice Sunday within Fair Tax Week, which is this Sunday, the 28th. And that's an opportunity for churches in particular to explore issues around tax and what a fairer tax system might look like, and what it might look like to have more tax justice in our society and in our world. So we're really inviting you today. Hopefully you've heard something about the campaign, but if you haven't, that's fine. We'll be going there'll be introductory level content, and also helping us to go a bit deeper, particularly in the Q&A later, into what the campaign's about and what we're asking people to do, and how we can take action with our own consumer choices and also with our voices, both as individuals and as churches. And we'll be looking at how we can break the habit and reduce our dependence on Amazon as consumers, both individual and church. And we'll be looking at how we can call for the campaign how through the campaign we can call for measures that will fix the rules. So campaigning for better national and international rules, particularly around tax and how wealthy individuals and companies are taxed. And so we'll be talking about that a little bit later on this afternoon. So firstly, though, what about Amazon? Why focus on them in this campaign? And we're going to hear from Paul Monaghan, who is Chief Exec of Fair Tax Foundation, to help us really understand a bit more about Amazon and their tax record and what that really means. So I'm going to hand over to Paul now.
Afternoon, everyone. Can people hear me okay? Cool. Right. Amazon. So I've been looking at the numbers for about 10 years. UK, US, Europe. The big holding companies they have in Luxembourg in particular. So there's two things that you need to understand about Amazon before we even start. Amazon is not like the other US big tech businesses. Other US big tech businesses, Microsoft and Apple, they create a profit. They'll pay tax on that profit, and it might not be a lot of tax, but they will generate a profit and pay tax on the profit. And then they will pay dividends, post-tax dividends, every year. Amazon doesn't pay dividends, or rarely pays dividends. So because it's got no interest in paying dividends to its shareholders, it doesn't feel compelled to generate a profit. And because it's not generating a profit, corporate income tax isn't being paid, which is a tax on profit. So you might say to yourself, well, why on earth would anyone invest in Amazon? Nobody's getting any dividends. And the investors are there largely for capital growth. So it's really worth understanding that that one strategic move by Amazon in of itself leads to a much lower corporation tax burden than one might see in other large businesses, whether they're tech or otherwise. So that's the first thing to bear in mind with Amazon. So if we look at Amazon's corporation tax payments in the US, in fact, if we look at the US accounts, so we look at the global tax contribution, corporation tax contribution, it's about 8.5% last year. So way below the headline rate in all the countries that they are operating in. And they say it will stay low. There's actually a line in the most recent set of accounts which says, and we expect it to stay low. And in part, it is low because of new tax breaks that the Trump administration has just introduced, which unwind some of the tax tightening that the Joe Biden government had tried to put in place to get a better tax break. So that's the first thing worth bearing in mind. The other thing it means, and I won't try and get too technical, but when a business is growing and it pays its top level of staff in shares, what that does is when you pay the staff in the share, let's say you'll create a share and it's worth £1 on paper. And you'll say, well, you can't have that £1 paper share until much later down the line when you're still with us and you only get this £1 paper share if you stay with us for 5 years. But then it's worth about £5, not £1. So what they do in the accounts is they account for it at £1, not the £5. And so what that does is it creates an enormous deferred tax charge in the accounts, which doesn't lead to more tax paid. So if you ever look at Amazon, or another big one that's happening with right now is Palantir, the controversial business in the UK from the States, they're doing the same. So tech businesses that have rapid growth and issue lots of payments to senior staff and shares, that will depress the headline rate of tax as well. So this is me in a little way making a couple of excuses for them and letting you know the excuses they will make for themselves in case you encounter people who push back on you in the campaign. Having said all of which, it is still the case that if you or I, not me, but maybe somebody else, hypothetically, is buying a product from Amazon, when you get your receipt, the receipt is from Luxembourg. It's from Amazon EU SAL in Luxembourg. And it's the same whether you're in Germany or Spain or the UK. You are being billed from Luxembourg. And then the numbers we see for the Amazon UK subsidiaries is basically the cost of that UK subsidiary just getting the product to your door. It's basically a service charge. So you are being billed, your revenue, your custom is going to Luxembourg. Therefore, any profit is going to Luxembourg. And that's sometimes why we refer to this as profit shifting, booking the custom elsewhere than where the people live. And it's not just for the UK, like I say, there's probably a dozen European countries that they do that with in Luxembourg. So the other thing to bear in mind with Amazon is that it's got, so for me, that is the greatest evidence. So if I had to explain to someone very simply, what's the hard evidence for aggressive tax avoidance by Amazon, check your receipt if you ever buy anything from Amazon and look for Amazon EU SAL in Luxembourg, because that's where your money's going. The other two things to understand about Amazon is it's basically two businesses. One is retail, B2C, business to customer, you and I, and they run that at a tiny margin. They often run it at a loss. And because they run it at a loss, which they can do because I explained before, they're not trying to generate a profit to pay dividends, they can push other operators out the market. They can outlast you. They could go head to head with you for 15 years and not generate a profit. No other business could take a strategy like that and stay in business. So they tend to build market share really rapidly in retail when they go into a country. So there's the B2C. So when I did an analysis recently of the subsidiaries in the UK that service the B2C business, I could see an effective tax rate of something like just 7% in the UK. That's looking at those. But it's an estimate because I don't have all the numbers, because Amazon will not release all the numbers. So Amazon do this thing once a year, and they do it in key markets, Canada, the UK, Germany. They'll do a thing called their total tax contribution, and they will release it with bells and whistles. And they'll go, look at how many taxes we contribute in total. Now, the biggest part of that number is actually taxes, not that they contribute, but that they collect, like VAT. If we buy something and VAT gets added, The retailer collects the VAT off us and passes it to the government. It's not their contribution, it's our contribution. But they will call that, they will try and take some credit for that, which is ridiculous. Secondly, they are bearing some taxes, for sure. So look at them, they employ a lot of people in the UK. So they're paying a lot of national insurance contributions and employment taxes, as you would expect. And that portion is going up as the number of employees they have goes up. But the one tax they will never tell you anywhere around the world is what is the total corporate income tax in that country? What is the income? What is the profit? What is the tax paid or not paid in this instance? And they are averse to that wherever they go. So for me, that is the second example, if I was challenging Amazon, of if there's something wrong, what's the flag? And the flag is they will do anything but disclose income, profit and tax on a country by country basis, even though many other businesses do it voluntarily, all of their tax mark businesses, and even though it is now a requirement in many countries because of the EU. The EU's passed a new law, which means any big business operating in the EU countries, could be a US, a Japanese, a UK, whatever business, not just EU but headquartered businesses. Any company that has big business operations in the EU has to now start doing country by country reporting. But even there, when we're seeing the first returns come through in Romania, etc., Amazon are wiggling around the rules to not apply the spirit of that legislation. But many businesses are, not just for tax mark businesses. Many UK multinationals are. GlaxoSmithKline is one that's just gone full PCBCR as a result of this. Even tobacco companies like Philip Morris are adhering to it. Ford, the motor companies, are adhering to it. Cisco, the US big tax business, is adhering to it. So there are many US multinationals, but not Amazon. So they're the two things I would always challenge them on. Billing you from Luxembourg and why they will not disclose their corporate tax information. That's a lot there, and there's lots of technical numbers behind it, and I've been sharing them with Sarah and Simon, etc. And if you guys ever need a bit of help, you go to them and they'll come to me and we'll see what we can do. But we are operating on imperfect information. We have to make educated guesses, and then what we have to do is test them to see whether they go, that's libelous, you're wrong. And to date, every educated guess we've made about Amazon has been on the money. So, for example, one that we started to make an educated guess many years ago is that we thought we worked out that the vast bulk of the custom that they have in the UK is being booked in Luxembourg. And over time, when we kept saying it and there's no pushback, well, then you know you're on safe ground. So we have to be careful. None of us want to say anything that's incorrect, because then it'll burn us with other things. But I think there's enough to go on here to challenge Amazon, and particularly around the country by country reporting.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Paul. It's really helpful to have your wisdom, have your technical knowledge, and yes, your willingness to be a support with the campaign and to help us with the information that's been needed to build the case of support for the campaign. It's really valued, so thank you. I hope you're able to stay around to answer any questions that people might have, and if you do have questions, please do start to put them in the chats. I'm going to spend about 5 minutes now just talking to you about the shape of the campaign, and particularly the first step that we are asking people to take. Sarah introduced at the beginning, there are lots of ways in which you can be involved in the campaign. There's about looking at your individual choices in terms of where you spend and who you choose to buy from. There will be ways in which you can take action in terms of campaigning and advocacy that Simon will talk to us in a moment. But I wanted to focus on this kind of first step in the campaign that we are encouraging people to make and to talk to others about, so that we can start to build a movement for change. And that is to break the habits. So one of the things that we really hope that we can achieve through this campaign is this challenge and encouragement to people to rethink their spending choices. And that's been something that we've been exploring for a long time at Just Money Movement, looking at our banking choices, our investing choices, where our pensions are, and looking at our spending. And in all the conversations and workshops I've had over the years that I've been at Just Money Movement, it's often around spending that people get really quite energized. It's very tangible. most of us can talk about ways in which we have changed our spending choices over the years because of things that we have learnt, experiences that we've had, people and places that we care about that we know are impacted by our spending choices. So I think it's really important as a kind of way into this campaign is for us to pause and think about, where are we spending? And so what we want to do through the campaign is to help people join the dots between the spending choices that we make and the change that we want to see in the world. How does the way that we use money, the companies we buy from, like Amazon, how does that affect the people and places we care about, the justice issues that we campaign on? And thinking about where we spend money is not without its challenges, but it's a starting point that hopefully deepens our understanding and leads us into further action. And as we've heard from Paul, Amazon's track record on tax is one of the reasons why we want to grow a movement of people who are breaking the habits of using Amazon and are choosing to spend more positively instead. And so that's what the Break the Habit part of the campaign is about, an encouragement for individuals and churches to look at their spending choices. For many people, shopping with Amazon has become quick, easy, and a habit. But we're also conscious that for many of you have been involved with Just Money movement for many years and in other movements too. This is just affirming something maybe that you are already committed to. You may already be avoiding Amazon. And so we know it's quite complex. We know that there are people that we are in touch with, friends, family in our churches for whom they haven't joined the dots yet and they have a habit of buying from Amazon, and we may also recognise that in ourselves. So that's the first step we're asking people to take. And shifting our spending might not seem like a very powerful act, but what it does is it shifts our attention. We start to notice and to seek out companies that behave differently. So as we learn more about the tax conduct of Amazon or its environmental impact, we start to look for businesses that are part of a different story, a different narrative, a different way of being in the world. And as Christians, we're called to love our neighbours, to seek justice, to care for creation. And that means paying attention to where our money goes and the systems that money supports. So Break the Habits is an invitation to take that practical action, to pause before we spend or click online, to support local ethical alternatives, and to start building that movement for an economy that serves people and planets, not just profit. So although Amazon is the focus for the campaign, and we've chosen it because it is such a dominant force, it's a household name, it's everywhere, it's a symbol, as Sarah said earlier, of an economy that's built on extraction, that's concentrating wealth and power in the hands of a few, that's fueling and encouraging overconsumption, and that is driving up carbon emissions. So we hope that encouraging people to break the habit of avoiding Amazon, we can also encourage people to ask critical and thoughtful questions about all the companies that we buy from. So if you haven't yet taken the step to pledge to break the habit, then that's what you can do on the Just Money Movement website. You can go to our campaign page and there's a pledge form that you can fill in. And it asks, just very simply, it states a couple of things. It asks you to support the Challenge Amazon campaign, drawing attention to the way that companies like Amazon harm people and planet, especially through unfair tax practices. So that's a bit about kind of educating ourselves and sharing that information with others. And then to pledge to break the habit, to cut our reliance on Amazon, to shop more ethically, and to choose local and sustainable alternatives over Amazon wherever possible. And we've got some examples on the campaign page of those alternatives that we can start to champion and to choose instead. And we're going to be hearing a little bit more in a moment from Miranda about that joyful step of actually looking, where can we spend our money positively? Where are those businesses that are acting responsibly? What are the changes in habit that we can live out in our lives that shape a fairer, greener economy? And I just wanted to finish. I've left this quote up on the slide here from a book called The Economics of Arrival, which I really recommend as a great way into thinking about the kind of shift that we need in our economy. And it does touch on are the individual choices that we can make, as well as the wider systemic change. And I really like the way that it starts when spending is necessary, because I think that's the first pause, isn't it? Is spending necessary? Because actually the first step is often to cut down on what we're buying. But spend the world you want into reality by supporting companies that you believe in, from ethical fashion to fairly traded goods to local businesses. And we hope that over the course of the campaign, we can build up those resources of, well, where can we spend instead? And we're working towards a revision of our ethical buying guide for churches, which will come out in the autumn. And so we're hoping to have a really rich resource in which you can share with your church if you're looking at your church's purchasing, but will also help you as an individual too. And we would love to hear from you. And I'm sure that we'll say a bit more about that in a moment, about ways in which you can be involved. It'd be great to hear about the ways in which you are choosing to spend differently. But yeah, there are a few different ways in which you can do that in terms of looking for accredited marks and schemes, like the fair tax mark, as a way of identifying something about the ethics of the companies that you buy from. Choosing to support businesses that have an ethical structure and a positive impact, like social enterprises, B Corps and cooperatives, and supporting local businesses. And I think, probably the most important thing is actually stopping and thinking, is that spending actually necessary? Are there ways in which I can be more involved in an economy that's about shared use of resources rather than buying new? So on that point and that note, I will pass on to Miranda and invite Miranda to come and share a little bit of her own story of breaking the habit and finding alternative ways of shopping. Miranda is a long-term supporter and a former trustee of Just Money, and is the director of Christian Concern for One World. So she wears many different hats, but today she's speaking in a personal capacity. Thank you, Miranda.
Thank you so much, Rosie. It is a real delight to be part of this webinar today. And as you said, I'm going to be talking about what it has meant for me personally to do something that you've mentioned that many of us are trying to do, which is to start to change how we shop and indeed how we consume more generally as part of our quest as Christians to live out our calling in all areas of our lives. I'm very much a work in progress myself, and I really like that the campaign isn't about absolutes, but about a process, that process of thinking, what are the impacts that my choices make, and how can I have a more positive impact? And I really look forward in the Q&A to hearing how others are answering those questions. I've worked on fair trade for a long time, and one of the key things about fair trade is that it bursts the illusion that our choices are about ourselves, our needs, our wants, and our good, and that other people aren't really involved or affected. I've seen firsthand the difference fair trade makes. The Ghanaian pastor who was the head of a cocoa cooperative telling me how he educated his daughters because of the fair trade premium and price. The government official in the Caribbean who told me how fair trade banana prices had stabilized the country's economy at a time of crisis. So I've long sought out fair trade and ethical goods. But then I was challenged. Was I only concerned about producers? Or was I also concerned about wider issues of sustainability? And was I looking at the ethics of how goods were transported and how they were retailed? On the wider sustainability front, as Rosie has said, one of the big challenges for me, and I suspect for many people, remains restraint. The first part of reduce, reuse, recycle is tough at the best of times, and online marketing systems are particularly geared towards flooding us with reminders about things that algorithms think we may want. So part of my discipline is around trying to be sure that I'm not on that many mailing lists and that I limit my shopping online. It is so easy, as we all know, to make an impulse purchase online before thinking, do I really want that? Let alone, do I really need it? And of course, shopping in person has many other benefits. More on that in a moment. On the reuse and recycle side, I have always been a devotee of charity shops. And if you have a local community group where people can post requests or offers of goods, like Free Cycle used to do, and in some places there are still local Free Cycle groups, that can be a huge help too. One of the things I'm hoping we can think about locally also is facilities for sharing goods. I visited a community recently where there was a shed full of tools readily available for anyone who wanted to borrow them. And what can be easier than just ambling down the road, signing a book and going off the thing you need, knowing that you'll return and someone else will be able to use it. But if we need to buy, where do we begin? Well, for me, I have a kind of hierarchy. I love shopping at places where local people are selling what they have made. And there are, in many places, local craft shops, local food businesses. It's a great opportunity not only to purchase good things, but also to build local community and resilience and local supply chains and the local economy. And then if I'm looking for goods where I need to go on a larger scale or to a specialist retailer, I do a little background digging. Sometimes I use Ethical Consumer, which is a fantastic resource, and I'm really looking forward to Just Money Movement's forthcoming ethical purchasing guide too. And I look at some key questions. Where do they source goods? Where do the retailers, find what they are selling? Do they have a good reputation for working with their suppliers? Do they pay fair wages? Do they have the fair tax mark? Really good to be reminded about the importance of looking at the tax side too. That's an area this campaign is going to get me to up my game on. Now, that may sound like a bit of a grind, but it actually doesn't take very long. There are shortcuts. There's the ethical consumer rankings and some giveaways if a company is a B Corp or a member of the British Association of Fair Trade Shops and Suppliers, if they're a local shop, which is really rooted in the community or focusing on sustainability. Those are all very good signs. And we all hear about, by word of mouth, the good citizens, Timpson's, for example, with its work on helping people who are coming out of prison, or Waitrose. I remember having a fair trade farmer come to me, and I started to say something about the importance of the John Lewis principles. And he said to me, "You don't need to tell me about that. When they come out to visit us, they sit down with us and we tell them what our needs are, and they tell us about their principles and what their needs are." So for me, the thing is, I don't really notice the loss of using giant stores, because if I'm looking for a book, the local bookshop can often order it, maybe not overnight, but often very rapidly. Oxfam bookshops, Oxfam Online have an amazing selection. And then again, online, there's Better World Books and World of Books, which sell an enormous range of new and used books. They say that between them, I think they've rehomed more than 500 million books. It's also worth checking out your local Christian bookshop or one of the online Christian bookshops if you don't have a local one. They can often order books that they don't normally carry, and you're supporting their ministry too. For clothing or home goods, it is, as I'm sure many of us know, so much fun if you have the time searching charity shops, an unending treasure trove of both ordinary, prosaic things one needs, and also those one-offs that you look at and you think, I have never seen anything like this, but it's great. And you're supporting charity and rehoming goods. So how good is that? And if you need something specific, again, there's the amazing searchable Oxfam Online, which has a vast range for all shapes, ages, and tastes. And over the years, I've discovered wonderful fair trade and ethical clothing retailers, often with very good prices. And you can search out local artisans if you're looking for furnishings. It's amazing what you find, and often at prices that are lower than many of the high street shops. It's not just the convenience and the range that you can find if you dig a little deeper, though those are great. As I said earlier, it's also the community. When we shop locally, we're building up an economy of local retailers, places where people go not just to buy things, but to share news and have human interaction. And we're building community resilience. When we shop with smaller specialist retailers who often sell at similar or lower prices to the big chains, we're supporting an economy of people who know their goods and their customers, who can offer great advice and amazing services, whether that's for computers or radios or stereos or photography, and again, often at just as good prices as the larger retailers themselves. And I think that's important because sometimes people say, all very well, but what about the cost? We've found that generally you can shop ethically for roughly the cost of shopping more generally on the high street. And it's a fascinating thing to me that there are some companies, like Greg's, for example, that can have a massive fair trade commitment and still have lower prices than other companies that don't sell fair trade and tell you they can't do it because of the cost. So cost isn't necessarily going to go up when you shop ethically. And just to close, I'd go back to what Rosie said about joy. This is such a win-win. Knowing who is behind the products you're buying and knowing that they've been fairly paid, that's a joy. Building relationships and hearing people's amazing stories about how they do their crafts or how they run their shops, that's an amazing joy. And those relationships are also definitely two-way. During lockdown, we found that our tendency to deal with small companies where we were more than just a customer number had huge benefits. People went out of their way to help us get goods, even when there were real challenges. I remain very profoundly grateful for the kindnesses, the friendships, the stories, and above all, the sense that in seeking to love God and neighbor, we also discover the love of God and our neighbor for us.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Miranda. It's lovely to end on that hopeful note. And that's certainly one of the things we're trying to encourage is just that sense of having a sense of joy and hope when it comes to how we can live well and share our economy well together. So we've heard quite a lot now about our shopping choices and the ways in which we can try to break the habit in the context of our Challenge Amazon campaign. The other side of our campaign, as I've said at the beginning, is about fixing the rules, because we know that consumer action alone isn't enough and that we need to challenge companies like Amazon also through new laws, new regulation to ensure that they pay their taxes fairly and act in other ways that are enabling human flourishing and planetary flourishing too. So our next speaker, Simon Thompson, is a campaigns consultant with Just Money Movement and is going to talk to us more about the aspect of the campaign that's calling to fix the rules. So over to you, Simon.
Thank you, Sarah. Hello, everyone. So we are asking, as part of our Challenge Amazon campaign, people not just to act individually, but also as Christians in the UK and around the world to act collectively and to campaign for change through what's called the Intergovernmental Negotiations for UN Framework Convention on International Tax Cooperation. That's a bit of a mouthful. So for Nevermore, we'll call it the UN Tax Convention for short. But I can just tell exactly what that is and why we are asking people to support it. Next slide, please, Rose. So what has led to the UN Tax Convention? Well, as Paul so eloquently set out, global tax rules don't match a global economy. Systems are national, but companies like Amazon operate across multiple countries. And they can and do shift profits across borders, for example, making sure that all the receipts are in Luxembourg. They're using low tax countries and complex structures to cut the tax bills. Now, countries, as a result of their behavior, lose out on the tax from those companies that are operating within their borders. That means less funding for health, for education, for infrastructure, and of course on climate action. And developing countries are hit the hardest because they rely on corporate tax more than anyone else. Why? Because they don't have many other sources of income, especially income tax. It's often harder to collect, with many people in developing countries earning low incomes or working informally in the informal economy. Next slide. So what is the UN Tax Convention and what is it trying to achieve? Well, a UN-led process involving 193 UN members, UN member states, which started in 2024, but want to come to an agreement from the majority of countries and then individually ratified about the UN Tax Convention. It aims to create shared global rules for taxing multinational companies operating around the world so that companies are taxed more consistently across the globe. The UN Tax Convention aims to tackle tax avoidance and profit shifting by closing loopholes used to move profits to low tax jurisdictions. It also aims for a fairer, transparent system for all countries so that countries can clearly see the tax that they are entitled to in their local economy as a result of global corporate companies operating in their jurisdiction. And they also aims to help support the UN Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, by increasing revenue for health, for education, for climate action and development. Next slide, please. So what's next? Well, there's the UN process, which is continuing at the moment. Negotiations have started, I say, in 2024, continuing through this year until next year. The next key meetings are, in fact, in New York in August, between the 3rd and the 13th, and in Nairobi between November the 30th and 11th of December. That's the 6th session of negotiations. So those talks have been going on for some time. But the goal is a finalised treaty text that's expected to be ratified sometime around September next year. Member states will review and prepare to vote at the UN General Assembly around autumn 2027. As I say, the decision point will be that UN General Assembly session where countries will formally decide whether to adopt, reject, or request changes to the treaty. Any treaty will still need to be passed by a majority of UN members and ratified by each individual signatory country. Next slide, please. So challenge Amazon, break the habit, fix the rules. Well, we're calling for stronger global tax rules as part of a UK and international movement. Big companies should pay tax where they operate, so profits stay where value is created and local communities benefit more. Introducing stronger rules on corporate power and fairness to balance the power between corporations, workers, and communities. And we're also asking people to write to their MP as part of our Fix the Rules campaign to support the UN Tax Convention, to ask MPs to do the same, and to put the UK government into backing fairer tax global rules. And also, finally, we want, of course, a fairer global economy where rules work for people, not just for corporations like Amazon. Thanks very much.
Fantastic. Thank you, Simon. It's great to have heard about the UN Tax Convention, which might sound quite obscure, but is one of the key ways in which we think it's important that we try and fix the rules on tax as well as breaking our own consumer habits. We've now got some time for questions, for comments, contributions from you all. And so there's one question which I can kick off with in the chat from Helen. I don't know if Helen is still with us, but this is asking about one of the key questions, which is quite important, and I'll read it out, and that will give anyone time to also ask a question. So Helen says, there's an enormous Amazon warehouse fulfillment building near where I live. It's a large employer in the area, albeit a reported mixed experience of working there. What can I say to people who push back on the campaign because they perceive Amazon as a good thing because they employ people? Rosie, could I come to you first of all?
Yeah, of course. I think this is a great question, Helen, and a really sensitive question, particularly in areas where Amazon is a big employer. And I think it is a question that we will be asked and that you will be asked if you're sharing it locally. We have put something in the frequently asked questions about this. I'm just going to cover what we've covered there and just add a little bit to that. And I think what's important to get across is that, yes, Amazon does create jobs. That's only part of the picture. We know from workers' campaigns and unions' campaigns that many of those roles are low paid, they're insecure, they have quite high turnover. So they may not be, the kind of quality, secure, well-paid jobs that people need and want in their local economy. At the same time, you have the growth of Amazon contributing to the decline of local businesses and high street jobs. So you're replacing the jobs, perhaps more than creating new ones, and you're replacing existing businesses that were paying their fair share of tax. So in terms of that overall picture to the economy, that's not necessarily good news. And I think we can also start to talk about that kind of extractive model that we've touched on a little bit, whereby, yes, jobs are created, but much of the wealth that Amazon creates is then concentrated amongst their shareholders, senior executives, rather than being widely and fairly shared with employees. So all those concerns that we've talked about around its tax practices and the dominance that it has, the way that it squeezes out other competitors and smaller businesses, as well as its environmental impacts, I think we can use those arguments to raise questions about Amazon's overall contribution to the economy. If it's helpful to have more detail on that, particularly if you're having those more local regional conversations, then do reach out, Helen, because we're really happy to try and work with you a bit more in terms of questions that you're getting and push back if there are ways in which we can help you articulate that or point to evidence, point to some of the workers' campaigns that are happening. Then really happy to support you in having those conversations.
Thank you, Rosie. And did any of our other speakers want to come in on that one? Otherwise, I'll go to the next question. Paul?
Yeah, so I think the way we try to address this is we look at, and it's not just about Amazon, it's about Shein and Temu as well, if you think about it. Yeah. And however bad Amazon are, Shein and Temu are 10 times worse, I can guarantee you, in terms of tax conduct right now, particularly Temu. So what I would say is that it's about businesses in the round making a tax contribution. And right now, I think if you looked at all the businesses that operate in energy in this country, or fossil fuels, or banking, they make a very large tax contribution in the round. If you add all the taxes together, it's a big number. The banking sector has a banking levy in place. The fossil fuel sector has 2 windfall taxes in place, for example. But if you look at big tech, I would say the tax contribution of big tech compared to the more traditional sectors is much less. And that's why we're a supporter of things like such as a digital services tax initially, which is ugly and crude, but it tries to get a further tax contribution. And I think the thing that we've just said about the high streets is vitally important, because we know even in the Makerfield by-election that took place just a few weeks ago, which Andy Burnham won, the high street, the demise of the high street was a top 5 issue. That issue, which was probably in the top 25 of most people, now is a top 5 issue. People really believe they are losing their high streets, and it's accelerating. So I think what we can do is realistically say to people, if you want to thrive in high streets of cafes and local shops, etc., you can't, you have to support those entities, use them or lose them, etc. Those jobs, it's to some degree, it's a zero-sum game. If you're buying off Amazon, you're not buying off somebody else. Those jobs go, those taxes go. So, but I totally accept where Amazon have the hubs, it's going to be very difficult there to argue that in those localities that boycott Amazon. But it's the same if you were in Aberdeen talking about fossil fuels, let's be honest.
Thanks, Paul. And I think that's very much why we've nuanced the campaign around break the habit. And what we are basically arguing for is for companies to play a fair and responsible role in the economy, not to go away completely, but to do the things that they ought to be doing. I wanted to come to a question in the chat about you talked a bit, this is probably another one for you, Paul, about the structure or the complex nature of Amazon and the different sorts of businesses that they actually have in the UK. Someone's asked, for example, what about Amazon Marketplace and also Kindle? How do we sort of respond to the different bits of Amazon, if you like, both in terms of tax, but also as consumers?
It's so complex. I mean, I analyse basically on a certain day in June, 20 sets of report and accounts will come out from 20 subsidiaries, which will account for about half of their income in the UK. And then you're trying to second guess everything in terms of the numbers. So I did a deep dive on the 5 B2C. Probably Kindle would be classed as B2C, but sorry, business direct to customer. The other businesses are B2B, business to business, and that's all about cloud services, etc. I think, again, I use this term quite a lot, which is I believe aggressive tax avoidance is hardwired into Amazon top to bottom. And I believe it's been hardwired there from day one. I also think it's hardwired in Temu, for example, and Shein. But why I believe that is, in the early days, Jeff Bezos tried to establish Amazon in an Indian reservation because he thought there was tax advantages, until the First Nation people told him to bog off. I've seen conversations of radio interviews with Jeff Bezos in the early days where he said he's inspired about how the money was made in America in the early days, and he said it was as the railways expanded across the country. The money was made by the people who own the railway because they knew where the railway was going. So they'd buy the land in advance. So they'd buy the little towns around the land because they knew where the stops were. So whoever owns the pipe of commerce, that's where the money is. And what Amazon see themselves as is they see that Amazon as the pipe for retail in the world. They see it as those railways going across the American Midwest, and they can get ahead of the game and make the money because they can have a rental approach to it. So in many ways, they will keep running Amazon retail at a near loss, or at a small margin or near loss, because of the other way they can make services such as Amazon Web Services. So the margin on retail generally in the UK anyway is probably about 2%. The Amazon on the margin on web services and high tech is nearly 40%. So that's the business model, and they don't pay dividends most years. So how on earth do you compete with that? This is a source of major concern right now in Europe. Every major capital across Europe, this is a source of major concern.
Thanks, Paul. I did say that I would let you actually speak. Did anybody want to ask a question verbally? Otherwise, there are some more questions in the chat that I'll come to. So there's a few questions in the chat around some specific aspects of ethical shopping. Someone's also mentioned about ethical consumer, which has been mentioned before, subscribing to Ethical Consumer magazine and how that's changed their buying habits. That's really good to hear. Couple of things, perhaps I'll come to you first, Miranda, and then Rosie, if you want to chip in anything extra, particularly where thinking about online options. So where getting out to the shops is difficult for people. What's the best online shopping option to go for? Are there different companies on a product by product basis, or is there a more ethical option that's wide ranging like Amazon? Then we've got Devon, who works in a Christian bookshop and just is saying that they felt the impact big time. And Nick, who's the director of a charity which has a Christian bookshop in hospitals, we've had to diversify our stock to combat the impact of Amazon. So maybe a general online thing, and anything perhaps about books in particular, Miranda.
Yeah, so really good questions. And I think Ethical Consumer has a guide of alternatives for online shopping. And so that would be my first stop. There are some kind of online ethical department stores like Ethical Superstore. I think the best thing to do actually is say that you'll give yourself a certain amount of time, maybe take an hour here or an hour there, and start to look at the options for the areas that you're particularly interested in. Doing a little digging pays off, because then once you've done it, you just don't have to think particularly. You know where you want to go. Shared Earth is also another really big kind of multi-pronged retailer. In terms of the bookstores, really interesting to hear from the Christian bookstores. I'd love to hear from you how we can support Christian bookstores. And I know, as I said in my discussion, that I can sometimes order through one as a way of supporting them as well. But it would be really interesting to hear what you would recommend. The other options are really good as well, the world of books, the Oxfam bookshops, and so on and so forth.
Thanks, Miranda. Rosie, did you want to add anything on either of those?
Just to say, we've put a few more ideas for alternatives, certainly for online shopping, in the church resource pack. So if you haven't found that yet, you can download that from the website. It's got a couple of suggestions there for kind of tech products, which I think is something people are very used to going online for and might struggle to find locally. And obviously we're not kind of signposting specific retailers, but we have given examples, and one example within there is Richer Sounds, which is a high street retailer, but I think you could buy from them online as well. But would be a good place to start for if you're looking for tech. And yes, we've listed some alternative retailers for books and for kind of household goods in the church resource pack. So we would also, I think, as we would probably reiterate, like if you are finding places as well that you finding helpful to buy from online, we really want to kind of grow that kind of sharing of ideas and resources as the campaign grows. So please do just send us an email or a social media message, and we can kind of start to build that collection and make sure that we are sharing your ideas too.
That's great. Thanks, Rosie. I'll come back to you, Paul, in a sec, but Ian and Catherine, did you want to ask or say something?
Thank you. Yes, and thank you. All these presentations have been so helpful. I wanted to just ask a little bit more about Amazon Marketplace, because I've been trying to not use Amazon, but I have sometimes bought stuff on Amazon Marketplace, including that was the way I first found World of Books. And secondhand books, I try and buy books secondhand, but is it, if people are saying, well, I buy things through Marketplace and that isn't going via the same routes because it's going, you're using other suppliers more directly. What do we say about that?
Paul, did you want to come in particularly on that, or Rosie, I know in terms of our angle on small businesses?
Yeah, to be honest, I have no real direct experience of Amazon Marketplace or how it figures in the scheme of things. The fact that I'm saying that probably means it isn't significant right now in terms of revenue or whatever. I'm certainly not seeing it in the subsidiaries I'm looking at in the UK, but I'll keep an eye out for that in the future.
Okay.
I just wanted to say one other thing though about ethical consumer. Ethical consumer is one of the most wonderful things this country has ever created in the last 50 years. It is not just a magazine that tells you, informs you what's happening in the world and to help you guide your buying. It is activist. They help set up the fair tax mark. One of the workers there, our chair is from Ethical Consumer. When you buy that tiny little £25 a year ethical consumer subscription, and that lets you get into the database and the magazine and everything, you're actually supporting an entire movement which is trying to stimulate ethical consumerism. They are so passionate. So they are not just a magazine. They are not just an information source. They are a movement in of themselves. And I think I saw Rob Harrison's name on this chat a bit ago. So absolutely wonderful people, and it's part of a movement, and it's so aligned with what you guys try to do, which is just you're trying to leverage money to be used in a more ethical way. And they've been around for 30 years, 40 years. So always consider ethical consumer for anything.
Simon, is it to do with this in particular? Yes, I'll go to Simon, and then we actually have Rob Harrison on the call.
If Rob's coming in, I should be very brief, but just to say that this campaign is about individual action to reduce our reliance and dependence on Amazon. It's about taking collective action together to try and get the rules fixed. But it's not about targeting small businesses that often have to use the Amazon platform because they have no alternative. It's a way that they survive, but Amazon clearly hits them hard with the rules, with the profits, and with the constant changes. And you speak to small businesses and they tell you all the time they really struggle to compete with Amazon that can just clout them where it hurts. And that's what we're not trying to do, is target the small businesses, but we are trying to encourage people to go direct to the small businesses themselves rather than order through Amazon.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Simon. I'm very mindful of time, but Rob, please, I didn't see you down there, but great to have you on the call. Do say a couple of words.
Sorry, yeah, I'm Rob from Ethical Consumer. Thanks for all the kind words that everyone's been saying. I've been sort of hiding in the corner and trying not to get too involved in the call, to observe a little bit, because we've been working on Amazon for a long time where we are. I really like just one of the questions about not sounding like a school mom. How do I talk to people? Can't quite find the question now to read it out, but it was, how do I talk to people about it without sounding preachy? And I guess, you know, Ethical Consumer, we've been kind of engaged in this conversation for a very long time. And I would say that the best way to do it is to try and find a conjunction of interests around the problem, and the problem is our failing economy, or the there's not enough tax revenue to pay for disabled people, or whatever the issue is. It's around. So if you can find unity with someone around the problem and go, well, the problem is we're not raising enough tax to cover all the social needs or all the other stuff that we need. If you can find agreement on that, then you can move to some of the causes, of which Amazon is one, and as which it's a course of action to take. But I think if you can't make a connection, if someone is denying climate change, you can't really kind of move to what's the best way to take climate action, if you see what I mean. But if you can get agreement on the problem, or acknowledgement that the problem exists, that's the place to go along. The other way, which is if you're an Instagram influencer or something like that, is to just make a positive story about the alternatives, like the other products. And we were talking about other, and so we do that as well. Ethical consumer, I think Back Market is a big kind of second use tech hub for computers and all that kind of stuff. And so we will talk about, you just do it rather than having a complicated conversation about Amazon, you just go, have you seen this other alternative that's actually cheaper, better on lots of levels, and all that sort of stuff. So then you don't have to necessarily engage in the detail. So that was really just I was just a reflection as well on, because I was at another it's a fair tax week. It was another thing this morning. And it may be useful in the campaigning about one of the new tax standards that was issued this morning. And it was that someone mentioned that actually tax is quite a good indicator of how the business is going to behave across all sorts of areas. And it's actually, if they're being dishonest about tax or trying to play silly games and all that kind of stuff, you can pretty much guarantee that that's part of business culture, and you're going to find that where they work for, the way they work towards their workforce, the way they work towards the climate and all that kind of stuff. So it's a really interesting thing to remember, because Amazon is also getting a lot of grief for climate and worker impacts, quite rightly, but it's part of the same culture of just of just not being great. So it may be useful for
really helpful.
campaigns.
Thank you. Really good. And I love the way you say about being sharing stories of hope. And I'll come back to what Miranda said earlier about sharing joy and sharing hope. We want this to be a hopeful campaign. We want people to share our stories. So our call to action as we wrap up now, because mindful of time, we do want to finish on time, is to say, please do, if you haven't signed the pledge to break the habit, do write to your MP asking them to support the UN Tax Convention to fix the rules. Do have a look at the church resources too, but also do share your stories with us. Many of you are very experienced and long-time ethical shoppers and activists, and we'd love to hear from you. You can email us at info@justmoney.org.uk and share those stories. But huge thanks to all our speakers, first of all, to Paul Monaghan, to Miranda, to Rosie, to Simon, for sharing with us. We hope you found it helpful, and do stay in touch with us, and we look forward to continuing to work with you on this campaign as we go forward. Thanks very much for coming and being part of today's webinar.